Okay, we're back once more thanks to Orga Retro. We've got the jerseys on, and I've been waiting quite a while to wear this Tipperary jersey. And let's be honest, it's looking pretty slick. You can buy it at orgaretro.com, same as the Limerick one that Michael Verney is wearing there. And you get 15% off if you put in #OurGame as the promo code. Michael Verney, come on, you can't beat it.
A poor man's Tipperary version of Hulk Hogan. The most watered down Hulk Hogan I've ever seen in my life. Jesus Christ.
Hey, it's not bad now. It's not bad. Even you'll admit it. We're some yokes in Tipperary.
As nice as it is, I wouldn't wear it.
Why not? Hey, you wouldn't be good enough to be picked for it. No, not that I would either, but there you go. Right, let's
There was only one Stapleton that could ever play for Tipperary, and it wasn't you.
Yeah, there was no need for that. There was no need for that. Hey, let's talk about this unbelievable rivalry, because there's been so many games over the years. Tipperary have obviously won a few more and plenty more All-Irelands in the bag than Limerick. There's no doubt about that. But there's, like, I have to say at the same time, I got plenty of heartache as a young lad from Limerick. Again, like, first of all, I kind of was looking through the history books, and in 1992, Tipperary were 11 points to 3 up at half-time in the league final. Limerick ended up winning 14-30. That was kind of a precursor to a few years later, the 96 Munster final, which I was at down in Limerick. And Tipperary were absolutely cruising it. You know Tipperary, you know how we are. Absolute champagne stuff. 112 to 5 points up at half time. And then textbook Tipperary, that happens now and again, falling asleep a little bit. Ended up drawing the game. Frankie Carroll gets the equaliser. Limerick win the replay and get all the way to the All-Ireland final, and they end up, like, they beat Antrim in the semi-final, lost to Wexford narrowly in the final. To me, it felt like an All-Ireland that Tipperary kind of left behind, because you look at how close Tip pushed Clare a year later. But nothing but frustration. There was definitely a few times that Limerick upset me.
Yeah, I would have always rated it a good rivalry, but when you go back through the history books, as you said, you unearth some absolute gems and realise, like, just how good the rivalry was, just the depth to it. Like you mentioned Frankie Carroll there, Frankie's older brother Mossy. Now this must have been some subplot at the time. So in 1991, reading a piece from the Independent here, it's from 2009. In 1981, the rivalry entered a surreal phase when the teams clashed in Thurles. Eamon Cregan was hurling that day when Mossy Carroll lined out against his native county, having played for Limerick in the All-Ireland final the previous September. So he was playing for Limerick against Galway the previous September when Galway made the famous breakthrough under Cyril Farrell. And then a year later, he was working in St Mary's in Clonmel, and he transferred from Gary Spillane to Clonmel and ended up playing with Tipperary against Limerick the year after, which is just mad. And they ask Mossy Carroll at the time, how did he make sense of that switch? And even ask him and Cregan as well, and says, I find it difficult. Now, Mossy would have bad memories of being taken off in the 1980 All-Ireland final. Taken off in All-Ireland final is very hard to recover from that. I think someone had been on to him in Tip. That's typical. Someone from Tip had been on to him and tried to poach if they thought someone was any halfway decent. And next thing we knew, he was transferring to Limerick. It was very strange. And then Frankie Carroll had that situation where he was only 10 years old watching them play in 1981. And like he didn't know who to shout for. So it just says here, what did Frankie do? And he said, like, how did he cope with that confusion? I supported the two of them, he said. But then he said, like, family comes first. So it's almost a situation of shouting for Mossy Carroll when he has the ball for Tipperary, and then shouting for Limerick when they have the ball. It's a mad scenario.
Yeah, and you have plenty of those parishes that are right on the border. You know, the likes of Doon, sure, they're probably called Tipperary men by plenty of the county. I know Portumna people, they'd often be referred to as Tipperary men by other rival counties within Galway. And then you have the likes of Latin Cullen, which is famous for Nicky English. They would often be referred to as Limerick men because they're so close to the border. But you mentioned that one with Carroll. A more recent one, and this was such an odd situation. It was like when the miners met in 2016, the Tip and Limerick miners. So there was two lads who both hurled together at club level with Newport. So you had Dara Carroll, he was representing Limerick, and then Cian Flanagan, he was playing for Tipperary. So, like, and in another twist, Dara's father was from Tipperary and Cian's was from Limerick. So it was all muddled up. And just the final twist in the tale was that the Limerick manager, let me just see who it was. Yeah, it was Pádraig Tobin. No, sorry, that's the wrong guy. Leo O'Connor lived in Newport for 11 years, coached the two of them. with Newport. He was over the Limerick team as well. So it's mad, isn't it?
That's brilliant, yeah. Like, that's literally, like, you know, from a journalist situation, you're always thinking, oh, geez, wouldn't it be great if such and such met in a final, or there's some sort of a rivalry, or a maybe split identity between two different counties. But it doesn't get much more, the lines don't get much more blurred than that now.
Definitely not. Gary Kirby now. I just want to bring him back in again, because in 1997, you know, that little cack-handed style, but by God was he an accurate player, and he definitely broke my heart that day in 1996. Jump on then to 2007, and that was the famous trilogy. I think the whole country was tuned into that at that stage. And Gary Kirby was a selector underneath Richie Bennis. Richie Bennis's Limerick against Babs Keaton's Tipperary. Babs was back for a second bite of the cherry, and by God did he slobber all over the place and make a mess of it. But and the reason that I've no problem saying it is because Babs has no problem saying it when he thinks lads don't do well. But that trilogy, I was at the first two games, whatever it was, I couldn't get to the third one. But I just remember the first day up in Limerick, just baking hot. And I think Damien Rail got sent off for 2 bookings early on. Like, he'd had a bit of joy on Owen Kelly in the past, and I think that was for probably flaking him, let's be honest. And I have this vivid memory of one stage, Kelly being isolated inside and him pointing up to the air for the delivery. He wanted the ball in. But Tip went miles ahead in that game again. I think it was similar enough to 1996. 112 to 5 points ahead. Game all but in the bag. Ended up going to 2 replays. I think we had a couple of sets of extra time. The second day was in Thurles. I think that was an okay day, and Tip looked like they had it won. I remember Seamus Butler playing pretty well, the drum and inch man. And of course, Tipperary ended up, like, these were 2 fairly average teams, if we're honest about it. But they just served up absolute drama.
They were unbelievable. Just watching bits of the clips, kind of looking back now, and there's so many memories rekindled. A young Darry Egan banging in a couple of goals. I think he banged a goal in the second game and in the third game as well. Of course, I'd forgotten, like, I knew that he was dropped at one stage during 07, but Cummins was dropped in the middle of the trilogy. Jerry Kennedy played the second game, stopped a penalty, and it looked like, you know, he was after settling in perfect. It was a great image of Cummins kind of with his arm around him before the match starts, before the second game starts. Like, that must have been huge controversy even in Tipperary at the time. That was just one of the subplots. And, like, Andrew O'Shaughnessy's 65 in extra time to draw it and bring it to a second replay. I think definitely one of them, maybe both of the replays were played on a Saturday. Definitely one of them was played on a Saturday evening anyhow, because I remember it vividly. And yeah, I remember the weather being scorching enough at the time. It's one of those kind of great trilogies. It's like the hurling version of, I would say it's like the hurling version of nearly Dublin and Meath. That obviously went to 4 games, but like neither of them won anything after that year. Same as Dublin and Meath, but everyone remembers the quality of the games. They were just unreal. Like a draw, extra time, a draw, and then extra time. Like it was magic, absolute magic that summer.
There's some famous quote from Mick Mackey, I think, could have been back in the 40s or whenever it was. And apparently he was going through, and a couple of Tipperary lads were, you know, give him a nice bit of timber. These had been back in the days when they weren't sparing it. And it was something like, no Tipperary ash can break that, which is a great line. I asked Richie Bennis about the rivalry because he, like as I said, he was over the team in 2007. He would have played in plenty of the games back in, you know, give or take the 70s, that era. And he was talking about a game. He mentioned actually 1966 when he was a sub. And he said, I'd be known for having a rivalry with Tipperary, even though he married a Tipperary woman. But he said Eamon Cregan scored 3-5 against Tipperary that day. And that was kind of one of the games that kind of turned the rivalry. And when I looked up the match, one of the names playing for Limerick was Tom Blewett, Bluett. Where do you get a name like that? Unbelievable name. And then when I looked into him a bit more, one of the pointers put out by Dermot O'Flynn in an article was never substituted in 13 years of service for Limerick, which is some going.
That is some going. It's some name as well, like, because like headline writers now would just be waiting for, you know, Tom to get his chance and Tom Blewett. Do you know what I mean? They'd just be waiting for it, but he obviously never gave him the chance. He was unbelievably consistent. Yeah, it's a great name. Funny you mentioned Mick Mackey. I was just looking back kind of through his career and his records. Just came across a lovely article by Fintan O'Toole from, I think it was from 2014. And he goes through Mick Mackey's career, inter-county career began with him being called in from the crowd to tug out for Limerick in a league game against Kilkenny in November of 1930, and ended with an appearance as a sub in a 1947 Munster Championship game against Tipperary. But like his greatest hour, his greatest hour was when he scored 5-3 for Limerick when they beat Tipperary in the Munster final in 1936 in Thurles, the home of hurling, as you so often call it. They beat them 8-5 to 4-6. And it's kind of credited as one of the greatest individual performances of all time. And it's funny you mentioned that quote about no Tipperary Ash being able to break off this. One of his teammates, Jackie Power, he was his clubmate as well. He said he often showed me his body on, say, Tuesday after a game, and he would be black and blue. It was a case of stop him at all costs. You will hear a lot of hurling critics confirming other players for their scientific play, but Mackey was something special. He had great physique, as well as skill and mobility and daring spirit. And there was a great line here from Pádraig Purcell. Pádraig Purcell wrote that Mackey was the laughing cavalier of the hurling fields, a man to whom every game, big or small, brought an equal amount of immense personal enjoyment and an intense sense of personal challenge. Just like even like the legend of Mackey, the pictures, that great picture of Mackey in ring and everything, and just like like we haven't seen much footage of him because it doesn't really exist. But he's one of those kind of, to me, he's almost like a mythical character, up there with the Rings and the John Doyles of this world.
What did you say the score was in that that time that he scored 5 goals against Tip?
8-5 to 4-6.
Because like that's sort of a ridiculous sort of scoreline. But you know, also in 1996 when Tipperary played against Limerick in that Munster final, in the replay the scoreline was also ridiculous. 4-7 to Limerick, 16 points to Tipperary. I might read out a couple of the names that played in those games, just to sort of, I don't know, a bit of a throwback here, and you can tell me what comes to mind when you think of them. So the Tipperary team that played in 1996, I'll just read out the drawn lineups. So Brendan Cummins in goal, George Friend of Tumivara, Paul Shelley, Michael Ryan, who ended up being manager, Rémy Ryan, Colin Bonner, Brendan Carroll, Brian O'Mara, Conal Bonner, Michael Skippy Cleary, Liam McGrath, John Lahey, Liam Cahill, Declan Ryan, Tommy Dunn in as a young corner forward, and then on came Aidan Ryan, Nicky English and Kevin Tucker of Nina. So on the flip side then, you had a Limerick team with Joe Quaid, Stephen McDonough, Mike Nash, Declan Nash, Dave Clark, Kieran Carey, Mark Foley, Mike Houlihan, Sean O'Neill, Shane O'Neill, Gary Kirby, TJ Ryan, Owen O'Neill, Pat Tobin and Damien Quigley, and Mike Galligan, Frankie Carroll and Barry Foley came on. Feels like a bit of a throwback there, doesn't it? Well, it obviously is. It's 24 years on.
Shane O'Neill, the current Galway manager as well. There's some amount of lads, when you look back through it, that have either been on the inter-county scene in the last decade or are currently on it in the managerial scene. Like you called out a full forward line that included Liam Cahill, current Waterford manager, Declan Ryan, former Tipperary manager, and Tommy Dunn, current Tipperary coach. Like, it's unreal. Yeah, even when you go through those Limerick names always hold a special place for me, because we played them in 94, and obviously they would have beaten Clare with Kieran Carey's point in 96 as well. The likes of Frankie Carroll, Mike Galligan, Barry Foley. Barry Foley was only a chap in 96, one of the most awkward but beautiful players you would ever see. He was so unorthodox, but beautiful player, yeah. And just an interesting thing on Mackey. There's just another thing here. Some people say that he was credited with coming up with basically inventing the solar run. It was either him or his father. What was his father's name? John Tyler Mackey. He was
Mr. Mackey, I believe he was known.
He was presented. John Tyler Mackey was presented with a gift of £100 by the Gaels of Limerick on his retirement. Such was what he had offered to Limerick during a 16-year career. A little once-off payment to finish your career.
Not bad, not bad. Sounds like one of these sort of fundraising nights that some of these GA players are having now. Let's look at some of the more recent games. 2013 and 14, there was a couple of games around there. Were both of those Limerick wins? I know definitely in 2014, Shane Dowling scored 2 goals that day. The second one, remember, 3 Tipperary players went up for the one ball. Dowling gets the ball close to goal, wheels back out around and blasts it into the top corner. And then Tom Ryan, who I ended up playing club hurling with, he joined Coola for a year, South Liberties man, he ended up scoring the insurance point just after that. Do you have any, was it 2013 also?
Limerick won 118 to 115 in 13 and beat them, I think, 218 to 216 in Thurles in 14. Dowd was pure class though. He actually picked up the ball near the edge of the 6-yard box, but if he'd thrown up the ball, he would have been 100% blocked. So it's a real unusual kind of thing to do. Rather than like go to goal like you normally would, he looped around and bought himself the time to unleash this absolute rocket of a shot. And like the wheels nearly threatened to come off Tipperary after. I remember hearing like certain stories of indiscipline and things after that match, but they still got back to the All-Ireland final. Tipperary did. No, there's never any indiscipline or anything like that. But there were a couple of absolute belters against. What's that?
Not only a few simple old pints.
A simple owl salad.
Yeah, no doubt that was washed in with it. 2016, I'd say that was a bit of a... that was one of the games that probably let you know Tipperary were going to win the All-Ireland that year, because Bubbles got sent off after something like 13 minutes and Tipperary just bossed Limerick for the rest of the game. And that kind of put out a fair old signal. This team means business this year. Is there any other game that stands out to you?
Another one that showed that the Tipman business, they obviously didn't win the All-Ireland, but the easily could have had, was in 2009 when they absolutely annihilated Limerick. They hit them for 6 goals, and kind of that had massive ramifications for Limerick. So they were after ending up in an All-Ireland semi-final, probably not by default, but they weren't exactly impressive on the way, and there was a lot of like different talk about things that were going on in the camp. So Justin McCarthy subsequently dropped a good lot of lads for the 2010 campaign, and a lot of other lads went with them, and it turned out nearly the whole squad went with them, and they played with a skeleton squad for 2020, which knocked them back a good bit. But funny enough, I've never actually met him face to face to say it to him, but Graham Mulcahy was one of the benefactors. He played in 10 because I remember playing against him, and he was even very, very lively then as well. But he was one of the benefactors. So while a lot of lads' inter-county careers suffered, he was kind of given a chance. And look at him, he was nearly hurler of the year 10 years later when they won the All-Ireland.
Actually, Nicky Quaid played outfield at the time, so
right.
And he plays outfield for Effin. Obviously, you have to mention 2018. Limerick beat Tipperary comfortably in the Gaelic grounds and absolutely deserved to win that. There's been a couple of great league games as well, but one of the things with the season being suspended at the moment is we're kind of denied seeing what Tipperary versus Limerick in Championship this year is going to look like, because there was of course the Munster final last year when Limerick pasted Tipperary. There's no two ways about it, on absolute fire that day, but we never got that rematch later in the year. And like one of the big things is Tipperary, that let's say the Championship doesn't happen this year, They might say that Tipperary can't win 2 in a row, but they will have been champions basically for 2 years if it goes all the way back to 2021.
Oh, that is awful. Sheedy will be going for 4 in a row now, I suppose, will he?
Yeah. Considering he's already won 2010, 2019, he will have still have been champion in 20 and then 2020. Yeah, I like the spin you're putting on that. So we like to do a rivalry series in every one of these Orga Retro videos. And we were kind of thinking, what players could we look at, historically over time, and we kind of accepted straight away, if that there's no one that Limerick have historically that can compare with Owen Kelly or Nick English or any of these third players. Who's their Larry Corbett? It just doesn't exist. But if I'm to be actually serious, one of the ones we did come up with was Noel McGrath against Cian Lynch, 2 absolutely amazing midfielders. Off the top of your head, who are you sort of veering towards? Because without fully analysing, probably in your gut, you'd probably veer more towards one player than the other.
Oh, it's a tough one, isn't it? They both offer a lot of similar qualities in the sense that they're both unbelievable stick men. They're capable of, remember Noel McGrath's one-handed flick in that league game a couple of weeks before the corona kind of took over. And it was he's capable of those unbelievable little bits of skill as well. Cian Lynch is too. Noel McGrath, to be fair to him, has delivered at county level consistently since 2009, since his debut season. Won an All-Star, I think, was he still 18 when he won an All-Star? I think if he wasn't 18, he was 19. He scored 1-5 off Jackie Terrell in a league final in Thurles, an absolute belter as an 18-year-old. Obviously, you have to take into the fact that he was hit with testicular cancer in the middle of that and has bounced back to have an unbelievable career. Should have been nominated for Hurler of the Year last year, in my view. I would say he was one of the best 3 hurlers in the country last year. Cian Lynch obviously was already hurler of the year in 2018, and it's kind of since 18, 19, and even the early stages of 20, we're starting to see consistently what we always thought he could deliver. Was kind of moved around, started as a corner forward, went out into the half forward line, but we're kind of seeing him in the freedom of midfield, allowed to dictate games. He's their kind of link man in midfield. He joins a lot of dots from defence to attack, gives in beautiful ball, and as we've seen in some of those league games earlier on this year, is capable of delivering those outrageous bits of skill that he doesn't even seem to think about. But if I'm being honest, like, are we taking them right now, or are we taking them over the course of their career? Because if it's over the course of their career, I'm taking Noel McGrath. If it's right now, with the scope for another 5 years, like Lynch has, but Noel McGrath probably hasn't, I'm taking Cian Lynch. But over the course of their career and a body of work, I'd be taking Noel McGrath.
Like you've kind of mentioned a bit of the background there, it's kind of similar enough that they both started inside, then probably both had, and I'd say it's briefer for Cian Lynch in the half forward line, and then end up around midfield. Both of them have a great eye for a score. Both of them can take they don't score many goals, but I'd say if they were in the position, they can both score a goal. Both are capable of all sorts of flicks. Sure, that flick Cian Lynch had a couple of weeks before the suspension through his legs, incredible stuff. Noel McGrath put the ball in your gob from 100 yards. I'm going to go with the tip man all day, but I do realise that Cian Lynch is up there with the best. 3 All-Stars for Noel McGrath. Now, he's been on the go for, obviously, this would be his 12th season, whereas Cian Lynch is only around since maybe 2014 or 15 or something like that. But probably you'd have to give Cian Lynch the edge in terms of like who's a more elusive runner with the ball, because even though Noel McGrath, he doesn't really lose the ball, he probably doesn't have that pace to kill you going straight up the middle. So from that point of view, Lynch would have the edge there. But yeah, for a guy who's done it so often over the years against the big teams, you kind of have to just about go with Noel McGrath. Now, we'll throw it out on a poll on Twitter, and people can let us know if they agree or disagree.
Well, Noel McGrath is that smart as well, that you don't see him going running with the ball, because he's not blessed with an unbelievable turn of pace. So he doesn't go running 30 or 40 yards with the ball. He just finds these little pockets of space, is able to plant his feet, and is able to throw a ball over from, all sorts of different areas. So they're two different types of players, to be honest with you. Just something you mentioned as well. I know some people don't like when I make references to wrestling, but imagine like Liam Sheedy, imagine the All-Ireland winning manager carried around a belt, and he was carrying around a belt for 2 years as All-Ireland winning manager if the championship didn't take place this year. You'd be fair sick.
You are so mate, I'll give you that. What about then a couple of other comparisons? So we'll throw that one out about Noel McGrath versus Cian Lynch. We were actually finding it hard to come up with good comparisons, but some of the teams right now, players from the teams right now compare well. Sean Finn against Cathal Barrett is a pretty good one. And another one we were looking at is, who would you prefer to have as your main man, edge of the square? Would you rather be feeding ball into Seamus Callan, or would you rather feed it into Aaron Gillane?
But different types of threats. Obviously, both the main threats for their team, but different types of threats. Gillane doesn't get nearly the same amount of goals as Callan does. Callan seems to get himself into those positions invariably, whereas Gillane will kind of lean back and throw points over off the left. I'd probably take Callan, to be honest with you, particularly, as I say, it's different. If you're taking it over the course of his career, you're definitely taking him. If you're taking it now, probably only has a couple more years to go, but I'd still take him. If I wanted to win the All-Ireland in 2020, which of them would I take? I'd take Callan, just because the threat he has of rattling the onion bag. 8 goals in consecutive games in last year's championship. We'll probably never see the likes of that again. I'd say I'd just take him narrowly.
I'm very interested to see how Gillane develops over the years. Another 2 or 3 years, he could be fairly unstoppable, assuming that this Limerick team stays together and they keep building, and maybe John Kiley staying will be crucial to that. Do you remember when Seamus Callan had all his teeth knocked out in that game against Limerick? I think it was Nicky Quaid came out to meet him, and helmet hits helmet, and teeth just absolutely exploded. When you saw the photograph, at the time you were like, why is he going off? You see the photograph later on, and it's just horrific. And I think on social media later that evening, there was a photo of him at the dentist getting his pearlers all fixed up, but that was grim. Sean Finn against Cathal Barrett. Do you remember in 2016, Cathal Barrett was up for sort of hurler of the year sort of territory, and like he's like there aren't too many that kind of get that many scores off him. I know there was a couple of games like maybe 2017 before he got dropped off the panel, had a tough day against Cork, maybe had a tough league final against Galway also. But in general, they have two kind of similar sort of lads who are just an absolute ball of energy coming out, and they're not just content to hold their man, they want to beat him up a stick.
Yeah, the last cornerback to get hurler of the year was Brian Corcoran in 1992. I think he was only 19 at the time. And to me, the only two current cornerbacks in the game that would have any hope, it's difficult enough as a cornerback to even get in the equation, but the only two that would have any hope in the current game are these two, just because they offer you so much more than a cornerback. Like Sean Finn starts so many attacks for Limerick. Not only is he unbelievably sticky, unbelievably tight, rarely get a score go off him, he always gets flicks in, he always comes out with the ball, it's never a big clearance up the line, it's always retaining possession, it's always the right ball. Barrett's the same. Barrett's an absolute live wire. Like when Tipperary weren't able to retain the title in 17, and even when he wasn't involved in 18, you found it hard to see them winning without him being involved, just because of what he offers to them. Just an absolute live wire. Helps out a full-back so much, and both of them do. Finn and Barrett both help a full-back so much. So if a full-back mightn't have to be a 10 out of 10 full-back if you have someone like that beside him, kind of guiding him and covering for him as well. But two supreme players have that bit of dirt and the bit of filth that every cornerback needs, but have the bit of silk as well on the ball.
Okay, that's about it so for this episode of Orga Retro Rivalries. Don't forget to go to orgaretro.com if you want to get these jerseys or any of the other sweet gear they have, and use the promo code #OurGame if you want to get 15% off.